Welcome to Business Focus. My name is Brandon Ritchie. This is an approximation of a moustache. And if you're in business, at some point, you are going to need to run an IT project. It's just something you really can't avoid. So if you're in charge of that project, you're going to want to make sure it is done on time and on budget. So today I have with me Mia Tate, our Microsoft practice lead at First Focus. Hello, Mia.
Hello.
Who is going to tell us at least 5 ways to make sure that your IT project turns out to deliver on what it was meant to deliver on time, on budget, and with everybody buying in. So where to start, Mia? I guess what we should probably do is talk about how you define the problem to solve when it comes to an IT project.
Yeah, look, good place to start.
Yay.
Why are we even having a project?
Yes.
So I think one of the things we used to do in business, and it still sort of filters through a little bit now, depending on the business, is we used to be able to put IT projects to the side. We were like, oh, that would be a nice to have. We'll do that next year or next quarter or whatever it might be. No more running from them. Every business is IT or technology infiltrated and reliant. Yeah. Absolutely. So these projects now are constant. Whether it's a new CRM, whether it's implementing some form of sales, whether it's rolling over to a whole new system, migrating to the cloud, whatever it might be, there's always something happening in this space now. And so it is really important that at the very start we understand the problems that we are trying to solve. And if we don't do that, obviously it flows through and causes a whole lot of dramas. And I guess it seems obvious, right? But a lot of the time people are assigned to manage these projects, right? And it's not always them that know best. And they may think they know best, so it always boils down to the people. And so what we want to do is clearly identify what the problem is, and we can do that using some Microsoft tools.
We can.
Can I say?
You can.
And so what I always suggest to people is start by asking every role, every level of management, every team, however it's structured, we need to make sure that we're, getting feedback from everyone. What are their problems? And I guess obviously dependent on the project, dependent on exactly what IT facet we're looking at. As I say, it could be a migration from one program to another, implementation of a new system altogether, but we need to ask people the current pain points that they are experiencing.
Well, because by doing that, then you're going to have clear definitions of success, e.g. those pain points are no longer in play. That's what we're aiming to achieve. Boom.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And how do you do that? Well, Microsoft Forms. So, if people have already got the Microsoft stack, obviously we want to optimize that, utilize that. So send a Microsoft form, keep it very simple. 3 questions. What are your current problems? And that might come as a bit of a shock. And then people are like, well, don't we want to be a bit more specific? But no, because we don't want to put words in people's mouths. We don't want to take them down a path. We want them to say exactly what they're feeling. And so if you ask them what their issue is, it could be something like, I can't communicate with my team very well, or I can't find a single source of truth for company information. My onboarding experience was not great, or something like that. Yep. What will happen is there will be themes with these answers. So, as I say, 3 key questions, that's all you need. It might be something like, what are your current pain points? And then get a little bit more specific and ask them, with technology within the organisation, what do you think you could improve? And then what's something you'd like to learn? And pretty quickly, you'll find some common themes. They'll help you then shape what problems you're looking to solve, and then they'll become your deliverables or your outcomes for the project.
Okay, fair play. And then I guess the next note I've got here is buy-in. So in that particular case, are you wanting people to lead by example? Are you wanting people to commit to maximizing the value created through the project? What are you talking about there?
Yeah, look, I guess because my experience with IT-related projects is very much in the Microsoft space, in the SharePoint space. So we see a lot of migrations from other programs applications into this stack. So I guess if I always relate it back to my personal experience, when we talk about buy-in, I see it all the time when management's kind of mandates sort of something where it's like, well, it's time to simplify, it's time to optimize, whatever that might be. We identify the problems, but then they may not necessarily walk the talk. So, they might say we want to move from this program to the other, but then they'll go around saying, oh, I don't like that, or oh, I'm just going to use this, and that tone, that action flows through without them even realizing. So straight away people are like, well, if they're not going to do it, well, I'm not going to do it. So buy-in is not just about who's in the room for the project, but it's also about the culture and the, way that we're approaching it. So be open-minded, be understanding, make sure we're leading by example, and then buy-in for the actual people in the room for the project. Again, with people being involved, like as I said at the start, someone is assigned to lead a project or run with a project, generally speaking, within an organisation. They don't always necessarily, know best when it comes to allocating or dictating who is in the project group team. So depending on the size of the project, obviously you might only have one person assigned, or you could have a few. But it's really important that we are looking at all areas of the business. Think of the roles. Think of the people that are actually using this product or program or application or whatever it might be. From the very data entry level to the person that's updating and maintaining it to the person signing off on it. We need to make sure that we've got the right people in the room.
And that's the thing. The bigger the organization, the harder that is, right? But so if you're going to want buy-in from people, though, people won't buy into what they don't understand. And so that's where communication and training comes in, right? So how should we be communicating with people during these projects and obviously after to make sure that happens? That's
a really good point. We don't have to be tech people to be involved in these types of projects. And sometimes it's better if we're not tech savvy, because that's a different perspective. And these projects are only as good as, the basic level of understanding. It is really important that we are communicating and that when you talk about training, a lot of the time I see success where people are actually introduced to these tools on the outset. So not partway through, not towards the end, not after it's done, but actually at the start. So we find we say, so because they don't know what they don't know, then quite quickly people will almost self-nominate. Oh, this is really awesome. I can see the problems this is going to solve for me. Yeah. I'm going to help bring this into the business because it's awesome. So communication really and training has to be right at the start. And it is important that whilst we might not be tech savvy, if we're involved in a project, we still need to give a bit of effort into having a high level understanding. So whether that's someone taking you through, whether you're doing that yourself, we still need to know sort of what it's about.
Yeah, and I guess the continuous improvement piece off the back of that is I think part of the planning is I think you and I agreed earlier on is that the idea of projects never really end, particularly not in IT, right? So it's that whole how do you make sure that as part of the plan you've got continuous improvement and I guess re-examination of intent versus outcomes. Yeah. So I mean, to that extent, how do you make sure that those ongoing processes are put in play and it doesn't just get done and then the application or the project just gathers dust essentially?
Yeah. Look, I think there's a fair bit to unravel there, but I think the key here is that if you've got the clear problems to be solved, if you've got the right people in the room and they've got a solid understanding of what we're actually trying to do, we've got the key, I guess, elements understood of what the program's actually doing or the application, whatever it might be, then what tends to happen, so if I just flip it on its head a little bit, what tends to happen is people, the more they know, the more they're like, oh, yes, let's do this, let's do that. So it's kind of, it talks to that evolution piece, but what needs to very much happen is, okay, that's stage 2. So yes, it is an evolution. We want to continuously improve this, because gone are the days of implementing something and it being fixed and set. Remember websites? We used to like spend months planning them, building them, and then it was done. And the website was like a solid for, a couple of years at least.
Yeah, easy.
Whereas now, like, it's an ongoing improvement. You change your website weekly, monthly, like it's a continuous change. And it's like that with all IT now. So it's very, very much about being very specific on what we want to achieve now. What are the must-haves? What are the low-hanging fruit items? Whatever that looks like. And then going, yes, this is all of the things. The more you learn, the more it's like, right, we'll get this nailed and then we'll do the next part. And we'll put that in stage 2 or stage 3. And it is really cool actually, because people will, as I said before, self-nominate and go, oh, okay, they'll get really passionate. And these people may be someone that's a frontline worker. This person might be a supervisor. They might be a manager. They'll come from every element of the area of the business, every walk of life, and they will actually make it a more holistic, awesome, meatier solution at the end. But we need to still be very focused on that initial set of outcomes.
So, I want to touch on that too, because the idea of scope creep is, it's just the worst thing with projects, right? It's like, well, but what if we did that? What if we did that?
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that we're not, limiting our ability to adapt the way we look at the problem to solve versus letting scope creep come in?
Yeah, it's a good one. And it talks to, I would maybe say, industry-wide challenges around trying to make projects really rigid. Yeah. So we don't want scope creep. We need to always reference back to what we're trying to achieve. But in every IT project, you will see issues come up if you are trying to be too rigid. Yeah. If you're like, right, well, we've got a week to go, quick, like everything's got to be billed by the end of the month. Well, guess what's going to happen? Corners are going to be cut, or not so much corners per se, but, we'll do 1 training session instead of 2, or, I can't get those people in the room, so let's just make an assumption on what their problems are or how they want it. And so that's where the wheels start to come off. So, I'm very much of the mindset, well, look, let's just be a little bit more flexible. Let's understand that now this person isn't available. So, do we, push it a week, or do we bring forward something else to make sure that we're offsetting that week, or do we do some online training instead of face-to-face, or, that's where you've got to be flexible, and that's where, you've got to move it a little bit. But at the same time, of course, you're not going to go and roll out a whole another area or module or something because someone said, oh, that's what we need now.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's what we don't, there's things that come out, variables that we can't necessarily tie down. But what we should be doing is looking at that to become an opportunity for the continuous improvement. So you're never going to please everyone. There's always going to be people that are have their feathers ruffled about these types of, about change. You know, that's across the board. That's not IT. That's not tech. That's every single project and different personality types. But we can absolutely be accommodating, slightly flexible without necessarily adding in whole, variations to projects either. So
yeah, I think that's the key thing is like, when you start a project and you're looking at something new, of course, the more you look at it, the more you're going to understand it, the more you're going to see use cases for it. But the trick is to go, those are great options for continuous improvement for the next stage or whatever. But if you start shifting out the goalpost, the project never ends. There's budget blowout. The problem to solve disappears. It's a disaster. So I think it's just understanding that there will be more you can do, but does it have to be done to achieve the initial outcome or desired outcome? But
it's a really good point too, because I will come back to it, because when we look at projects, or my own personal experience, what I find is the more people know, exactly as you said, the more they're like, oh, well, actually, can it do this and can it do that? And, oh, it can do this. And then with that can come negative statements as well. Like, oh, it can't do this. Oh, it won't do that. And so one of the things we need to be very clear on with projects on the outset is not just to go, this technology is amazing, this is all the things it can do. We actually also need to be very realistic about the limitations and what it can't do. And I like to do that right on the outset. SharePoint's not a website. Like that's an example. Like you get marketing people involved, they're in the buy-in stage. They've, said that, they're supporting that single source of truth, right? So we've identified the problem, we've got the buy-in from people, but then we talk about the limitations or the risk or whatever, and they're like, oh, well, I want it to look like this and I want this there. And it's like, well, we don't want to be going down this route of custom coding and making things so different that you can't own it as an organisation. So we have to say, whoa, it can look pretty, we can make it, do these things, but it also is not a website. We will not be doing these things. And it's like straight away from the outset, there's no disappointment. So we don't bring the marketing team in 3/4 of the way through the project to then review the branding and then go, well, that looks terrible because I wanted to put this navigation there and that widget there. And so, yeah, it's a good example. I guess we always need to talk about the limitations because it can't do everything for everyone. So,
and that's probably part of that buying conversation, right? If you're going to the CMO or, whoever's hitting up marketing, like, look, this is what we're trying to achieve. Is that okay with you? Are you happy for that to be the end outcome? Here's what it is, but be really clear on what that end outcome is and why. I liked what you were saying to me before we started filming, which is, of all the things to not cut corners on, it's the training. It's the most important part to ensure that you get value out of the project 9 times out of 10. Do you want to just touch on that a bit in your experience?
Yeah, look, I guess the communication training, it's sort of like you have that peppered out throughout, but then at the end, it's a really important piece. It's that, okay, well, let's do this official handover. Let's make sure everyone's feeling comfortable with the solution and offering a bit of support and hand-holding after the fact. When we do our proposals, we always put that in there.
Right.
And if people want to reduce pricing, sadly, the first place they go is training. And it's just can't be an option, and I will never without kicking and screaming allow that to be dropped off a project because whilst it might save a few bucks on the outset, it's going to be all sorts of dramas down the track. Bit of extra short-term pain, i.e. a few more dollars to put to time aside for the training is going to be so much more long-term gain.
Sure.
And so it is something that, I am saying, everyone is tightening the purse strings a little bit, and I'd prefer to see projects, well implemented, and that really is training. You just can't. And it's not, I'll train the trainer, it's getting buy-in again at the end, but it's making sure that people are able to sit down and do their job efficiently and effectively. And if training's not done properly, then they'll have a workaround, they'll figure it out, but then they'll start whinging about it or complaining, and maybe rightly so. And so then that breeds negativity and inefficiency and disruption, and it's like, well, why did we implement this solution and why do we go with this one in the start when a bit of training could just deal with that straight away? So yeah, it's a big one.
Just sort of on a similar front in terms of communication to a business, but there's always more than one project you can do as well, right? Like there's only so much capacity, so much resource, so much money. So I think when you are looking at a particular project, it's important to talk to the company about why this one, like why are we focusing on this? Because clearly everyone's going to have something in their department or in their workday that just like annoys the crap out of them, right? So like I just think creating clarity around the why is also a good thing to get that buy-in, to not have resentment, because otherwise people will be like, well, man, you don't listen to me about my thing. Why should I care about whatever this thing is? Yeah. So
it's a good point. And I would challenge anyone that's listening to go get a Microsoft form, do the 3 questions, send it out now. There is absolutely nothing stopping someone in an organisation from going and asking those 3 questions and seeing what comes back. You know, it might not be IT related always, but like you will be blown away with the answers. I know we've worked with some businesses recently who've done it and they loved it. and that was all across the. So we had a client that was doing training recently, and I asked them to do this in relation to the group that was coming to the training, and the responses were phenomenal. They were taken aback by how much input they got. And then for another SharePoint migration project, we did this recently. When they came and said they were interested in doing this project, I said, well, before we even get started, go and send this survey out. And the buy-in and the answers and the results were awesome. And there were themes.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's definitely,
it's
definitely challenge everyone.
Accessible option for everyone listening to have a crack at.
Yeah.
All right. I think the other thing I want to touch on is just timeframes, sizing, capacity constraints. So the thing I see all the time with projects is that people don't know how to size the required tasks within them. And often the other problem is that a person or people within the organization are pulled into a whole bunch of different projects, but they're the single constraint on all of them. And so often that could be a software engineer or a developer or whatever. So I think it gets easier to identify trends and issues as you do more projects. Retrospectives are key. Like at the end of a project, looking back and go, why did this succeed? Why didn't it succeed? When we looked at sizing, how far off were we? Why? I just think that's such an important part of just continuous improvement, not on an individual project, but on all projects. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny. I think, I haven't counted, but I would suggest it's probably 200 plus SharePoint implementations I've done in the last 10 years, maybe, a bit less. Okay. And every single one is something's learnt. Like it's, you've got your base, but every single business is slightly different. And I think, so you can have your parameters and what you work to, but I think, it's just really interesting what you learn. And the ones where I've seen the most success is where you've got really good people involved on the client side. So I know that you were just saying like people can be torn in different areas. They might be assigned to a couple of projects, but I think if they've got the right attitude, the right mentality, and they've got, support, etc., then it's so successful. That and the training. So I guess like my challenge to organisations would be if you are going to be doing a project soon or at some point in the near future, which no doubt you will be, make sure if you do have people assigned that you are supporting them or that you've got, I guess, a level of understanding with how busy they are. Yeah. Because honestly, the wrong person or the wrong frame of mind of that person, if they're, fatigued, exhausted, pulled in a lot of different areas, it can completely destroy a project. It's a little bit like if you have a shocking teacher through high school, kind of just can ruin a whole education experience and have someone fail versus pass with flying colours. Yep. So it's a huge...
Speaking from experience there? Or?
Let's not go into my teenage years. But I definitely think it's a huge part of a project, and it does get overlooked sometimes. So
something I've always found was quite important is to understand how many hours a week roughly is taken up on BAU tasks for a person, because that pretty much determines the room left over for ad hoc projects, right? So find a way to track that workload without being a micromanager. That's going to be key. Which will probably lead on nicely to a conversation we're going to have in the future, which is how to use Microsoft tools to track projects and workload, etc. We'll come back to that. So look, I think we'll probably leave the how to effectively nail an IT project conversation there. And I guess just to recap, what I'd say is we covered off determine the problem to be solved, what are the measures of success, get buy-in from key people who can lead the way, the fact that projects never really end, so factor in continuous improvement, don't be too rigid, and of course factor in limitations so that people don't say this sucks, and communication and training. If there's one thing to not miss out on, it is the training. And also just on that, training is required for every person you onboard, so make sure that's factored into it through some sort of LMS or whatever.
Absolutely.
I would assume. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
No, look, I think we could talk all day about it, but I think they're definitely the key ones. And I think, everyone has the opportunity to make these really successful. I read some stats the other day that 35% of projects succeed.
Right, that's a low bar.
Yeah. And so obviously there's a lot of, variables that go into that figure and whatnot. But it's just interesting. And that's projects in general. That's not just IT.
Right.
IT's actually
IT's
less.
probably worse.
Tech-related projects is less. And so there's a lot of opportunity for sticking to those particular things. And it is because training, I can say hand on heart that a lot of those fail because they don't have good training.
Okay.
It's kind of just, so yeah, look, I think that's all I'd say. And as a organisation, First Focus, we can, particularly in the M365 space, we got you. We can do that. So
Boom. Nice plug.
even if you've done some training or you're listening to this and you've already done an implementation of an IT project, don't be afraid to ask, for some training. You do the survey and see what comes back. And then, a lot of the things that come back you'll find could be probably addressed with training as well. So.
All right, so that is basically it. If you would like to talk to Mia, the Microsoft practice lead here at First Focus, then hit her up on LinkedIn. She's got lots of cool content coming out in the near future as well. I know that because she's filming most of it today with Danny. If you have any questions, comments, get in touch. Follow us on YouTube or Spotify, but probably YouTube is better. And we will see you in 2 weeks for the next episode.